You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount and cave diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and cave diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount and cave divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode is brought to you by our brilliant sponsor X-Deep and by the patrons of Speaking Sidemount. Huge thanks to both for their support that makes everything you're about to watch and listen to possible. I also want to acknowledge our episode sponsor Seacraft and the Seacraft Go dive propulsion vehicle, one of the best in the market. Look out for me using it in my videos on my YouTube channel, and also look at various episodes, especially episode 99, where I discuss the use of that DPV. Well, here we are, episode 100. And if you'd told me 6 years ago when I started this out in my back bedroom of my house that we would be here 100 episodes later, having interviewed such amazing guests on the show, I'm still staggered by what we've had, the people we've spoken to, what we've learned. It's just been immense, and I'm really proud of what we've produced, and I really hope that you've enjoyed listening to and learning from all of the guests that have been on the show. I want to pass on my personal thanks to all of my guests for supporting the show and sharing what they know with us. I also want to acknowledge X-Deep in particular. X-Deep joined Speaking Sidemount way back in 2018 and have been supporting the show almost from the very beginning. It's no small thing for them to do that, and I'm incredibly appreciative of it. The fact that such a great brand would want to support a show that is focused on information around sidemount diving, this little niche of diving, this little niche of a niche, in fact, of technical diving. And I think we're such a rabid audience, and I say that in the nicest possible way. We're so hungry for information. We're so passionate about what we do, passionate about being better and learning about sidemount and, in fact, cave diving as well. I also want to thank the patrons who support the show every month and help me just by providing a little bit of money. And what that does is helps buy things like microphones, the software that I'm producing the show with, the software that we host the show on. All of those things cost money. And patrons are the ones that help me support the show. So I'm very, very grateful, especially to our gold patrons who've just been amazing in supporting the show. Also, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank you for watching, for listening, and for all of the feedback that we've had over the years. I'm incredibly grateful for the attention. I know there's a lot out there these days, and I'm also very grateful for the feedback that I get. It's been extraordinarily positive. When I think back to the very beginnings of the show, and one of the things that drove me to produce the show, it was really about a lot of the negativity that existed on social media at the time. And what I've found through Speaking Sidemount is we've created this positive vehicle for communication about sidemount diving, and I just love it for that reason alone. So again, thank you for your support. Thank you for listening and watching, and please stick with us. If you want to help the show, one thing you can do is whenever you see something in social media, whenever you listen to an episode you really love, please share it. That makes a massive difference in building our audience for this show. Let's get on with this episode. Now, this episode, we have a sidemount secret. This one's on clip position for the lower clip on your cylinder. I think it follows on really well from the last sidemount secret about cylinder selection. And this one we talk about clip position for different types of cylinders and the impact that your clip position has on cylinder hold and making sure that your whole sidemount system works together. So look out for that one coming out a little later this month. Also, you may be aware from social media, I've just got back from Mount Gambier, spent 2 weeks there, did an amazing sidemount fundamentals course for a great group of students in what it can only be described as the phenomenal Kilsby sinkhole. 40 meter plus, and I want to say 40 meter, I'm being conservative, probably 60 meter visibility in there. Just absolutely stunning sinkhole, beautiful, beautiful blues, and a great place to train. We had to walk up and down a lot of steps, so that took its toll. But apart from that, an amazing week. And then we held a sidemount workshop at the end of that, where we got together, discussed a little bit about sidemount diving, speaking sidemount as I called it, and then we got in the water and had a lot of fun. It was awesome to have some time, and then of course we had to have a little social event or barbecue, as you must do in Australia after that. So a great great week. And I followed that up with some cave diving. Got to dive with Darren Mitchell of Dive Experience and Beck Neal or Bexter. Shout out to both of them. Thanks so much for diving with me. I had a great time diving in Tank Cave with both of you. And if you want to look out for that, we produced a video on both of that. And yes, there was another episode from the Trim Police. So look out for that for a bit of comedy or humor as well. Now, keeping it all Mount Gambier, I've wanted to do an episode on this region for a long time. I did one with Ryan Ketchkowski some years ago, a great Australian explorer, one of the very best. And there's some amazing, let's call them emerging explorers in Australia right now as well. And one of the foremost of those is Josh Richards. Josh is such an interesting guy. His background is second to none in terms of the diversity and the things this guy has done. But on top of that, he is just smashing out with his group, the Soggy Wombats, some amazing exploration in caves that most people, I think, thought were tapped out. And they just look at the black holes in the corner, put a new set of eyes on the cave, and they've been able to find some extensions both to Engelbrecht and also to Iddlebitty, which are just amazing. They're not places I'm going to go, but as you'll hear from Josh, they've found some beautiful rooms that have followed on from those, and it's great to see exploration continuing in that region. This episode is Josh and I talking about his exploration and also his amazing background. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into this episode of Speaking Sidemount. Hey Josh, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Thanks for having me, Steve. It's fantastic.
Mate, this has been a long time coming. You and I have known each other, or known of each other, I should say, for, 5 years or so now. Would you believe all the way back to 2019 when we first went to Australia to start our cave diving adventures there. And you were associated with a shop that we came in to start working with. And then, of course, you and I started diving together, I think, 3 years ago, post-COVID, I think it was. Yep. And did some amazing dives in Tank Cave and Pines, which we can chat about a little bit. And you are, to be honest, mate, one of the most interesting guys I know. You and I spoke about this before. Your background is just immense, and I won't share too much personally. I want you to do the talking. But let's get started. Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit of your background, and in particular, how you got into diving.
Sure. So I started diving very early. My dad was a military diver. It was almost inevitable that I would sort of go down that same path. I very much wanted to be a diver from the age of probably about 7 or 8, to be honest with you. We lived in the Middle East for a few years when I was growing up. My dad was doing a lot of diving at the time there, teaching scuba and just generally guiding people. And so I loved that. We were living on the Red Sea, and I desperately wanted to get in the water. I was informed that I couldn't do it until I was 12. So at least in Australia, to get a diving medical, you need to be 12 years old. So I had to wait. And pretty much a week after my 12th birthday, I had my open water, my PADI open water license. So straight into it. Most of my teenage years were diving as well. I'm not a big one for crayfish or shellfish or anything like that, but the rest of my family is. So my teenage years were very much spent going out and fetching that for the rest of everyone else. And inevitably I sort of went down a very similar path to my dad, I suppose, moving in, joining the military, joining the army. I ended up serving with the Australian Army, the Navy, and the British Royal Marine Commandos. And some of that was in the water, a lot of it wasn't. Probably not as much in the water as I might have wanted, but mixed that up quite a bit. I started teaching scuba recreationally and amongst that as well. I started doing technical diving, a lot of open circuit trimix, which is far too expensive to do these days, but in the late 2000s, it wasn't too bad. And I kind of stepped away from diving for quite a long time. So there was probably 4 or 5 years there where I didn't dive at all. I got back into it during a round-the-world trip. I was working as a stand-up comic. I've been a comic for about 5 or 6 years, and I ended up stopping over in Iceland as part of a world tour. I was on my way between Ireland and the US, stopped over in Iceland and had the chance to dive Silfra, where the two tectonic plates are pulling apart. And I sort of went, oh, that's right. I actually really enjoy this stuff. And finished the tour up. I got back into teaching scuba a little bit. I'm not a good instructor. I figured that out fairly quickly. So I went more down the technical path, got my first rebreather certification, my civilian rebreather certification, and yeah, early to 2019, not long before you folks visited Mount Gambier, I had gone over
Yeah.
there on my first visit to start learning to cave dive as well. So,
Hmm.
um, and I've thrown myself into it over the last 5 or so years, fairly heavily, to be honest with you.
That's an understatement. And mate, there's so much to unpack in there. And you and I chatted. It's quite funny when you and I get together. It's almost as if we can talk for hours and hours and hours. And I remember you were trying to work in the accommodation we stay in Australia just last week, and I felt like I was keeping you from your work. We chatted for about an hour and a half without even trying. So hopefully we can replicate that a bit today. But let's start out a bit. I asked you last week because it's quite interesting. I served, as many know, in the Navy and spent 14 years there. Loved my career there. Wasn't unhappy to leave, but just definitely enjoyed my time and got a lot out of it. But it's a little bit unusual, not so much to have a couple of services. I've seen that before, but to serve not only in the Army, the Navy, and the Royal Marine Commandos, but for different countries, for Australia and for the United Kingdom. So tell us a bit about how that all came about.
I, it was a mixed bag. So, I suppose there's two major strains for me growing up that kind of influenced that fairly heavily. One was the diving side of things.
Hmm.
The other was explosives. So I learned to handle explosives pretty early on, pretty young. Uh,
In the back garage? Or
in the back garage, yeah. No, I would, without incriminating myself, definitely learnt how to manufacture things that I shouldn't be learning to manufacture. From mid-teens
we'll keep
onwards.
that pretty quiet in case the security services are
That's
listening
all
to
right.
us right
I've
now,
I've
right?
been on and back off again watch lists, so I'm fine now. But yeah, I took a real interest in it. I suppose I was cluey enough to understand the chemistry behind a lot of what we were doing. I studied applied physics at uni, so being able to apply the I suppose the know-how around that. It's part of the reason why I worked in the mining industry as a blasting engineer for about 12 months. Hated it, but I was very
Hmm.
good at it because I could sort of understand what the explosives were doing. And as I said, linking that up with the diving, that's kind of where those two things crossed over. So I joined the Army as a combat engineer. I joined as an explosive specialist.
Hmm.
Combat engineers are kind of known for two things: we build it or we break it.
Yes.
I am not the kind of guy to be building bridges. I'm not tall enough. I'm not big enough to be doing those sort of things. I am the kind
Hmm.
of guy who will sneak in the middle of the night, pack it with explosives, and blow the same bridge up. So
Hmm.
I focus more on those kind of things.
Yeah.
Mine warfare, getting rid of booby traps, all those sort of things. I had a really keen interest in moving into the UXO side of things, so getting rid of IEDs, getting rid
Hmm.
of roadside bombs. I had the technical know-how and the skill set, I suppose, to do that kind of work. Um,
Hmm.
the shift between services from the Army to the Navy really came about from not being able to do that kind of work. We had a
Yeah.
very high operational tempo in Australia at the time. We were in Iraq, we were in Afghanistan, we just finished in East Timor, and I wanted to put those skills to use. And through bureaucracy, I suppose, the opportunities weren't there, where I was stopped from being able to pursue them.
Hmm.
I stepped out. It's where I went and worked in the mining industry for 12 months. Absolutely hated it, and decided I
Yeah.
never wanted to go into that kind of work ever again. And helped me realize that I missed diving, that I
Yeah.
wasn't getting the opportunity to do the diving that I wanted to do. So yeah, that's kind of where the technical diving came back in, the instructing came back in, and inevitably I decided that I was going to rejoin, and I'd rejoin as a clearance diver,
Hmm.
um, getting rid of bombs underwater. So,
Yeah.
um,
And I think a lot of people, coming from my background too with the Navy, a lot of people think of Navy divers as combat divers, but in our part of the world at least, that's definitely what the SAS do as opposed to the Navy clearance diving team. Draw the distinction for us, because I mean, I understand, but not sure our audience does. What does a clearance diver do?
so it splits up depending on where you are. So,
Hmm.
as we sort of mentioned before, I served with the British Navy as well. I served as a Royal Marine Commando.
Sure.
Their interpretation of a clearance diver is probably more along the lines of what you're describing.
Hmm.
Technically, a clearance diver is there to essentially check the undersides of boats, undersides of ships, to make sure they haven't had mines attached to them. If they have, then, removing them, getting rid of old sea mines, the old, the enormous spherical things with look like a hedgehog with the spikes coming out the sides. Getting rid of those. Not really a combat role. That said, in Australia, it is. So we have our SAS water troop, which, they spend a lot of time in the water, but the Australian Navy clearance divers, certain sections of those are assault swimmers. They are the kind of guys who do beach reconnaissance, sneak into places in the middle of the night, all that kind of stuff. They're all sneaky peeky squirrel business. They do that as well. So Australia is a little bit different in that we blend those roles, whereas I know in New Zealand and in the UK in particular, they are very segmented. The guys who work as clearance divers are different.
Quite a bit of underwater demolitions as well, so they would be clearing, not so much, clearing minefields, minesweepers do that, but if there were obstacles or obstructions to entering a port, for instance, they'd go and blow that sort of stuff up. And certainly I think they were trained in a little bit of planting limpets on the bottom of ships, etc., but not the main role. And I kind of saw them very much. There's quite a crossover in skill sets with commercial diving there as well, in terms of the equipment they use, and with full hard hats almost, and umbilical cords and so on. So fair amount of that sort of work, underwater construction and welding as well. And then, there's a little bit of a combat arm, but the SAS take most of the, I'm carrying a weapon with me, or and going ashore afterwards. And of course, we don't know much about that, but fantastic. And for those, certainly the Americans, I think most might be aware of the SAS Special Air Service, born in the UK, and both Australia and New Zealand both have first-tier versions of those as well. Again, very highly proficient and good at what they do. All right, move on. Tell us a bit about, so you went clearance diving and then somehow ended up in the Royal Marine Commando. So how did that one come about?
It was a pretty quick jump, to be honest with you. I ran into a lot of the same issues I'd had with the Army, with the Navy. And if I'm brutally honest, the Navy was worse. I joined up thinking, yep, cool, I'm getting back into this. This is what I'm good at. I'm combining skills. And I just hit more barriers with bureaucracy. So I was really only with the Navy in Australia for less than 12 months before I sort of went, you know what, this isn't working out. How can I apply skills that I have? Pretty frustrated. I was early 20s. I think I was 23, maybe 24, and sort of saying, what am I doing with my life? Very frustrated, and I've thrown myself into these things and basically no one cared. What do I do? And so I knew that at the time I desperately wanted to apply the skills that I had, the military skills that I had. And it basically boiled down to two options for me. I looked at it quite seriously, and it was either kind of follow my grandfather's path. He was one of the Royal Marine Commandos that served during World War II. He'd been involved in one of the landings in France before the D-Day landings, where they were pretty heavily slaughtered. He was one of the few that survived. And so I was like, maybe that's an option. The other option was the French Foreign Legion. And to be honest with you, it really boiled down to me not wanting to learn French. So,
mate, and you're far too nice. The one I know of a few people who have gone. I knew one personally, and it was the French Foreign Legion or prison for that guy. So I think you're too nice for that, to be honest, mate.
I'll be honest. I was not a particularly pleasant character to be around in my early 20s. I look back on it now and I sort of go, yep, there was a lot of anger, a lot of nastiness going on there. My time with the Royal Marines kind of showed that to me as well, in terms of the characters that different people in a troop fall into. I was definitely one of the least pleasant members of my troop.
Mate, you've matured well then.
Stand-up helped a lot.
Well, let's move on. Let's charge on then. So how did you get? That's why I said you're the most interesting guy I know. How did you get from the Royal Marines to a stand-up comic?
Almost a direct line, to be honest with you. So I had a couple of fairly nasty incidents with the Royal Marines where people either died or very nearly did die, and it put things in context for me. I grew up very quickly, and I very quickly realised that while I wasn't too worried about, say, me coming to a pretty grisly end, what I was really scared of was the people around me dying.
Yeah.
We had a couple of close calls where folks, were very lucky, and I was in a position where if I made a mistake, they wouldn't be here. And that put a lot of context for me. And I realized that I didn't want to harm people. I didn't want to be in a role or any kind of job where my main task was to go out and close with and kill the enemy, which was, that is the basic sort of, So from there, it's, again, what do I do? I've shaped most of my life around working towards serving with the military, not really sure what to do. One thing I'd done before I'd left for the UK was that I'd give him stand-up a go. I'd met a guy who was working as a stand-up comic. I thought that looks like a lot of fun. Even if it's not something I do professionally, it'll just be, entertaining. It'll be a great way to make people laugh. I like making people laugh. Let's give that a go. And
how much courage? How much courage does it take to say, hey, I'm going to do this and stand on a stage in front of what can be a pretty demanding or a pretty heavy audience and try and make them laugh?
I don't know about courage. I would say most comics need to. There's an undying need to do it. Most comics, that comes from extroversion. They need to be the center of the attention. They need to be whatever. I'm very much not like that. I'm quite uncomfortable with a lot of attention. I don't mind doing things, but I get uncomfortable with it and I find it very draining. That said, I felt like I had interesting, fun things to talk about. A lot of my stand-up was focused around science, and so I spent a lot of time talking about. My first comedy show was about the apocalypse, was the science and religion of doomsday. Moved on into, I later on we obviously started writing comedy shows about sending people to Mars. So it's always been that I've got a message that I feel is important, and while I really, really don't like the attention, this is the best way to get that message across. So,
and I think sometimes that sort of attitude, if you've got this introvert standing on stage trying to do something, that can be pretty funny in its own right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because Billy Connolly said this, and I've always picked it up. The best way to be funny is make fun of yourself.
Yep.
If you're making fun of other people, it can come across a little nasty, unless of course you got a heckler, in which case, say,
it's fair game,
free,
to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But, if you make fun of yourself, that's incredibly funny. And I kind of feel, being an introvert on stage and even displaying some of those characteristics could be hilarious. So I kind of get it.
Yeah, it works out well. When I lived in London for a while after I left the Marines while I was doing stand-up, and I met a comic based there called Ivor Dembina, and I sort of did one of his workshops, and very funny dude, very nice guy. Had been at it for a really long time, and he gave me one sort of snippet of advice that has stuck with me forever, which was you don't always have to be funny, but you do have to be interesting. So like you can joke all you like, continuous one-liners, blah, blah, but people are going to get worn out. You don't have to have people laughing every 15 seconds. If you can engage them with something interesting, they will listen to what you have to say. And if you can hit it with a punchline at the end, they'll remember it. People remember the way you made them feel rather than details. So if you can make them engaged, make them laugh after sharing something interesting, they'll remember it. So that's always kind of stuck with me.
Yep. And the Mars thing's pretty cool too. What made you set your focus on Mars?
I was leaving stand-up. So I'd gone through a lot with it. I'd decided to write one last comedy show. I'd actually done a show, I'd done my 4th year up at the Edinburgh Fringe, and I just finished performing a show where I dressed up as this giant screaming koala, big fluffy ears, and painted my nose and all that sort of stuff, played ukulele.
Yes.
Called Keith the Anger Management Koala. And Keith was a way of me sharing some of the stories, particularly from the Royal Marines, that I'd never talked about. It was actually a way of processing PTSD, if I'm brutally honest. And I felt like I was done. I felt like I had shared the things I wanted to share. I processed the trauma that needed to be processed. and I was ready to move on from stand-up. I loved writing. I really enjoyed writing comedy, but didn't necessarily love performing it. So I was sort of thinking, okay, I'll do one last show for the Edinburgh Fringe, and this is going to be my transition into writing books, writing interesting things instead. I'd learned during my physics degree we could send people to Mars. We had the technology to get them there. What we didn't have was the technology to bring them back. So I thought that sounded fantastic. I was like, yep, cool, sign me up, let's go. And it was also a nice metaphor for leaving something that I'd been doing for a long time. It was a metaphor for leaving stand-up. So I was like, cool, I'm moving on, new worlds, new adventures, all of that. Let's write one last comedy show. I sat down just after Edinburgh Fringe 2012, having just finished the show with Keith. And I was like, cool, I know exactly what I want to write for my next comedy show. It's going to be this thing about going to Mars one way. I typed Mars one way into Google, and a Dutch organisation had made an announcement 3 days before saying that they were planning to do it. Anyone over the age of 18 who had the right background, right kind of attitude, I suppose, and was fit and healthy would have the chance to sign up. Didn't matter where you came from, what country, whatever, you'd have the chance to be involved. And I thought, this sounds great, not just because I think it's an amazing idea, but also because I can turn this into a comedy show. Instead of it being, hey, we should go to Mars one way, it's like, I'm signing up. Who wants to come with me? And that first show was about finding the other 3 crew members.
Right. Absolutely brilliant. And you mentioned books after that. So again, back to the interesting, not only have you done military service, stand-up comedy, but you became an author. So let's quickly segue. And we're not talking about diving. I'm very conscious of that. But again, I think all of this, and I'm gonna head on something I think about you a little later that is probably pertinent to your diving, but you seem to immerse yourself so heavily in whatever it is you do. So tell us about writing books following your comedy excursion.
So that's the one thing out of all of this that I'm really glad that I delved into. Stand up, I'm not really a comic. I don't have the kind of the ego or the personality to really do it full time. What I do really love is being able to write the comedy. And so I actually got bored with a lot of my own material. I would, write it, perform it, and then go, cool, now I have to write more stuff. So shifting across to writing books was very natural for me. The 2 books that I've written and published were based on comedy shows. The next step for me, and it's been in the wings for a long time now, is actually writing a book that's not based on a comedy show that I performed. So there's a few options there. I've got about 5 or 6 different potential books, but the one that's probably most likely is being based on a friend from high school gave me a book called 101 Things to Do Before You Die. And since then, I sort of tried my best to tick off as much of it as possible. I think I've done about 87 or something. I've done all right. I made an effort.
More than a pass.
But being able to write up what those experiences were like would be really fascinating. That's what I'd love to do. So, cool. I really enjoy writing. I've been super busy with my day job for the last couple of years now. But I'm hoping that 2025, I'll see things ease back just a little bit so that I can start writing again and start publishing. So, that's one thing that I'm really, really grateful for, all the weird and wonderful experiences that I discovered writing. And I just wish I did more of it.
Cool. And we'll put some links to your current books in the podcast notes. So if anyone wants to grab them, I've had a quick scan. I regret to say I haven't read them. Every time I'm at the Habbie, I'm always, let's call it too busy. But I got to fix that. Sometime when in a cold, dark winter's night, I want to grab one of those books and have a good read. So I'll fix that in my future. Now, we haven't talked much about diving, and so let's get into diving now. And obviously, this is Speaking Sidemount. So, and one thing that's super interesting to me is, and let's get it out there right now, you are one of the foremost explorers, certainly in the Mount Gambier region, if not in Australia right now. And I think the level of exploring that you're doing is world standard as well. So I'm really so impressed to see what you're doing. As someone who's dived with you, You know me, I'm a good diver, good cave diver, but I'm not going to do the shit that you're doing. I'll tell you that right now.
You're too
And there's
smart,
very good
Steve. That's
reasons.
why.
There's very good reasons for that. However, it doesn't mean that I can't be impressed and by what you do, and also grateful in some ways for the new areas that you're opening up. But it is pretty interesting to me that you started in 2019 because it's only 5 years ago, and not such a long time to go from not zero as a diver, but zero as a cave diver to where you're, as I said, doing world-class exploration projects now that you're driving yourself as well, and you've formed a team. So let's go back to, that's the end, and I want to talk about that, but let's go back to the beginnings of cave diving, Sidemount diving. Tell us a bit about your experiences there.
So, as you nailed it then, I do have a tendency to completely immerse myself. That's exactly what I did. So
Yeah.
I visited Mount Gambier for the first time in March 2019 to do my basic cave course. I combined that with Sidemount. So I'd never dived Sidemount in my life prior to that. I think I'd given it a quick go where I'd bought some bizarre rig that I didn't know anything about whatsoever, borrowed a couple of Ali 40 cylinders and tried to go diving in the ocean with it, and it was a debacle. So
Yeah. We've all
I
been there,
turned
man.
up in Mount
Especially,
Gambier. It was an absolute mess.
I can imagine what the
Um,
cylinders did to you, but yeah.
it was chaos. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolute
yeah.
chaos. But I turned up in Mount Gambier, jumped on the course. Uh, I guess the sheer amount of diving I've done over, like I said, starting out zero with cave diving in 2019. But you've also got to bear in mind that at that stage I'd been diving for more than 20 years.
hmm
Some of that stuff carries over, and
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
being sort of focused on what you're doing and being placed in an environment that's unforgiving. It's not
hmm
a case of the ocean, covering up for your bad trim. If you're
hmm
hovering in unmoving fresh water and you're sinking, everyone sees that. So I threw myself into that pretty substantial. I wouldn't say the challenge, but I loved the environment because I could refine those skills. I could really practice those things really clearly.
Yeah.
Uh, I was only there for an extra week after my course, so I got a chance to do a lot of diving afterwards. Had to go back to Perth. I was still sort of figuring out things on the rebreather. I was on a JJ rebreather at the time, and I was still
hmm
figuring that out. And I started trying to apply those skills that I'd learned from the side mount and basic cave course to what I was doing. Options in Perth were pretty limited. There is a fairly sketchy flooded mine south of Perth that I spent a bit of time kind of poking around in. And yeah, that was sufficiently scary for me to sort of go, yep, I need to get really good at what I'm doing here. If I'm going to be going into these overhead environments, I
hmm
need to be seriously practicing. So I was back in Mount Gambier a few months later to do the next course, the cave course. I then stayed on, which is kind of where, I crossed paths with you guys because I started
hmm
working at a dive shop there not long after.
Yeah.
And it was a very busy few months. I took an attitude very early on with the cave exploration side of things that I wasn't too fussed what anyone else had to say. I was going to go and check all these places for myself. So
hmm
someone might say, oh, it's just a little puddle. It's nothing. I was going to go and check that. I wanted to make
Yeah.
sure. So I knew
Yeah.
that a lot of the places that had been explored had been done in back mount doubles. And so
Yes.
here we were diving side mount. I was young, fit, enthusiastic, and I had a great buddy with Matty Aisbert, who wanted to
hmm
come with me on all of that. So we started poking around every single thing we could. And as soon as we did the cave course, it opened up a huge amount of opportunities for us to explore further. And I
hmm
suppose that led to discovering Engelbrecht's extension, the
Yeah.
Engelbrecht's East extension. Matt and I found the first chamber for that on our very first dive in Engelbrecht's, purely
Yeah.
because a more advanced diver said, oh, there's a puddle at the back, you guys should go and check it. And we
Yeah.
did. And
Before we
yeah,
go too much further into that, I'll just sort of paint a picture for everyone. So Engelbrecht's Cave is a sinkhole effectively in the middle of the town, not right in the middle of town, just slightly out of town in Mount Gambier. And for this region known as Cave Country or Limestone Coast, there's sinkholes everywhere. And a lot of these sinkholes have now been explored, and in fact, cave systems in Engelbrecht's east and west is one of those. You access it through a building and then go down some massive number of steps to get into a pool, and then you can go cave diving. It's quite extraordinary that it's right in town. But like a lot of these, as you rightly say, have been explored, and almost I think a lot of people thought they were tapped out. And what you've been doing is basically looking at the black holes in the corners and checking them out. And I've heard of this before in Florida as well, where even sites like Eagle's Nest and Ginny Springs, people are finding new cave there because they're taking the time to have a new set of eyes on it, new techniques perhaps, new skill sets, and the desire to go and see what else might be there. So it's quite extraordinary. Tell us about, so was Engelbrecht's East the first additional cave that you found, or the first
yep,
extension?
yeah. So it was definitely the first big one.
Yep.
I suppose I'm quite good friends with Ryan Kashkorski, who I know you've had on
Hmm.
the
Yes.
podcast as well. And Ryan was very much a role model for me. I looked up to him. I
Yeah.
still do.
He's a machine.
And an absolutely extraordinary cave diver. And
Yeah.
I suppose looking at him, he gave me a few tips. He suggested a few different things like, hey, if there's water movement, that water's got to be coming from somewhere and it has to be going somewhere. So, chase the flow or follow the flow. And I suppose, yeah, I wanted, wasn't for me, it wasn't about finding the next thing. It was about making sure that I checked every part of the map. I
Hmm.
looked at things like the map for Tank Cave. There's a section down towards the bottom of it, called Here Be Dragons. And I suppose it alludes back to the old maps that had big gaps in it saying here be dragons, there's nothing here, or we don't
Hmm.
know what's there. I really love the idea of filling out those maps. I love the idea that we could go there and check it. And even if there's nothing there, we've checked it, we filled in the map, we know for sure. I always had the vision of having Google Street View for cave diving, and the idea that people could just, pull up Google Street View on their computer and actually go and explore and have a look at why we go into these places. So yeah, Engelbrecht's was a breakthrough for us, I suppose. It happened very early on. Like I said, it was literally the first dive that Matt and I had done in Engelbrecht's. We finished our cave course, I think, a couple of weeks before, and we've popped over, jumped into this puddle of water, swimming around in this quite a small room, and sure enough, I shine a light up to the roof, and there's a reflection there that we didn't know about. Pop up, there's an air chamber. Cool. All right, let's go crawling. Crawl through. So it's always about trying to find the back of the cave. Um,
Hmm.
it sounds a little bit odd for someone who's explored and discovered so much, but it's not actually about exploration. It's purely about understanding what the cave's doing, and I suppose, yeah, filling in those blank spots, shining a light into the dark areas so that we know for sure. And the technology has changed enough since the last sort of big batch of explorers were finding a lot of these places in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. Things have moved far enough ahead that, you know, young guys coming through and applying these techniques can push further, can find things, can squeeze into holes that people wouldn't even consider in the past. So, yeah, it's
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
an adventure.
Yeah, and of course, I guess you're talking about new survey techniques, and I know you're working on photogrammetry as well, which is pretty cool. So
Mm.
let's talk some more about Engelbrecht's, and before we move on to others. So the extension that you actually found, I haven't done it, and I'm not sure I'm going to. Partly because I don't want to destroy my dry suit, my beautiful seal, and I kind of feel that's going to be the outcome of that. So tell us a bit about how you access the extension of the cave and what's involved. I know you have to get out of the water, so
Yeah.
again, yeah, talk us
So
through it.
it's as you sort of mentioned before, it's accessed from a cafe. There's a cafe on the top, You then sort of wander down with all of your gear down about 4 flights of stairs, climb down a small ladder to sort of get just into the first pool of water. And that's a dive that numerous people have done. They do it on their cave course. Quite a lot of instructors take people there on it so that they experience it, because otherwise they wouldn't go to the effort of even doing that. It's a very short swim. So to go from that surface lake through to what is the first air chamber, the well-known air chamber, I think it's about 25, 30 meters of tunnel, and we're only down at 4 or 5 meters. So a fairly dedicated free diver could probably swim it, to be honest with you. They could pop down and pop back up into the air chamber without too many issues. That said, once you get into that large chamber, it is quite large. There's water running down one side of it, but there's rock fall, there's all sorts of things blocking it. So yeah, you do have to climb out of the water, carry all your gear, climb over quite a substantial rock pole. Towards the back of the air chamber, there's a reasonable climb up, and then you have to climb down through a hole as well to get to that puddle that we were talking about before. And from there, it's actually quite short. It's intimidating for a lot of people, but it's actually quite a short little section where the water level currently has dropped low enough that it's almost a roof sniff. You almost don't have to put dive gear back on to be able to get through this 5-6 meter section. Crawl up through a quite a steep slope, and as soon as you get onto that slope, you're then crouching, sliding around quite a large boulder, leads to this small area that we named the mud room. And in one corner of the mud room, there's a very small puddle and a very small sort of angled crack in the wall. And basically you need to slide yourself through that. Now, this is all dry. There's no diving at this point. It's all relatively dry. When we first discovered it, it was very wet. So that crack was actually fully flooded. It was full of mud. And so when I went through it for the very first time, it was definitely, it was heart-raising a little bit to basically squeeze yourself into this very nasty, tight, muddy hole and then pop out on the other side and go, yep, cool, there is something here. From there, it basically leads to a very small beach, and then that's where the dive starts. So there's a lot of hauling cylinders, a lot of climbing over rocks, a lot of nonsense to essentially get to the start of the dive. The dive itself is fully flooded. So the whole section that we discovered, the 400 and something meters of new cave that we discovered, it's all completely submerged. So there's no air chambers, there's no air pockets or anything like that. But yeah, getting there is quite a challenge. And the very start of the dive itself is incredibly challenging. So it's basically heading down a chimney, or quite a very steep tunnel at least. It's sort of heading down more than 45 degrees straight down. And the line is naturally quite complicated. Trying to get it to be in the right places was very, very difficult. And as soon as you get down 14 meters in the space of sort of 12 meters, you're suddenly confronted by a very, very small flattener that's full of clay. So it's all worth it when you get to the far end and it opens up into this enormous room, and that's gorgeous, and there's tunnels running off that room, and it's fantastic. But getting there was definitely challenging. Laying the first 50 meters of line was incredibly difficult. And once that was done, it became very easy. But yeah, that first step was definitely challenging, and it's still very challenging to get in there in the first place.
Great. And of course, Engelbrecht's East isn't the only one that you've found. You've recently opened up another one, Iddlebitty, which is just this beautiful cave. I got to dive it last trip, not this most recent, but the one before, with the cave group, I think it was, or the cave group. And you drop down, it's either single rope technique, or you're on a rope and a harness to drop down through a manhole onto a step, and then there's a ladder into the water. But it opens up into this really beautiful cave. I remember the blues, this blew me away. I've got a video of it on my YouTube channel, I think, and certainly on Facebook and Instagram, of us diving it. Not a long dive, I think a couple of 100 meters, am I right?
It's about 220 meters down the main tunnel at least, yeah.
Just beautiful, and really like big open tunnel, of course, and then you get to the end and it taps out. But I know you found an extension in that cave as well. So tell us a little bit about, firstly, how you discovered discovered it and also about the extension itself.
So that really linked in with the photogrammetry. So Will Passos is our team photographer, takes extraordinary photos. Will started to show real interest in modelling these caves, and he tried it a few different places, and Ittlebitty was really where he broke through. So that's that manhole tube that you're talking about. I essentially carried the camera down there for Will to get the scan of the tunnel. He then swam along, and like we took turns essentially where different members of the team would dive with Will while he scanned that stunning tunnel to produce this incredible 3D model. Where things got a little more complicated is there's, yes, that gorgeous main tunnel that you're talking about, blues and whites and all sorts of incredible colors. There are some very nasty side tunnels, particularly on the left-hand side, the south side, as you're heading down the main tunnel. There's some very nasty side sections. Will knew about them. Will didn't feel comfortable going in there himself, and so he asked me to take the rig. And so I started scanning those sections. They're quite extensive as well. They're not large, though. They're very, very tight. It's very silty, and it's pretty unpleasant stuff. We went through, scanned all of that, and went, that's great. You know, we've scanned a huge cave here. It's quite an amazing thing. It's not particularly long, but like quite extensive, quite a few different sections. The one area that we haven't gone and sort of scanned properly, I suppose, is right near the entrance. So when you first get into Ittlebitty, you get onto that platform that you talked about, and you follow the line around to the right, but you're actually in a fairly large, roundish room. And on the left-hand side, there's a flattener. And if you go into there, it leads to this very complicated, unusual sort of room with sections dropping off quite deep and little holes going everywhere. And so I was like, well, if we're scanning this, we need to scan all of it. And so naturally getting into that complicated section with the enormous lights that Will runs, the incredibly bright lights that Will runs, we started to notice things. And one of the things I noticed was that there was this very tight little pathway kind of curving back around to the right again, back towards the north, and then suddenly going straight up. And I essentially squeezed into this thing, and I could tell that there was no way forward. But naturally, you follow the flow, you follow different water movement. There were gaps above me, and so I looked directly upwards and looked at this thing. I went, what is going on there? And suddenly realized I was watching my bubbles break on an air pocket. They were breaking on a surface. So we eventually figured out a very complicated way to get through that. Obviously, as time has gone on, more and more people have gone through that particular restriction. We called it the trash compactor. Originally, it was called the spine bender because you literally had to bend your spine around to get through it. The restriction itself was barely long enough. It's quite a complicated restriction, but the main barrier was having to shift yourself sideways before you could go up. And the 7-litre cylinders that we were diving with, I think they're 73 centimetres long. And there was 74.5 centimeters of clearance. So it was very squeezy, very tight, and you were naturally bending yourself around to get through that. But we figured out a way, and as more people have gone through, that restrictions opened up. Limestone's quite soft there, so it has opened up. It's made it easier for people to get in. But initially, it was pretty horrifying. So that led into an enormous room. Like the extension itself is this large room. It's another collapse, and what we realised was what I'd been squeezing through to get in there was a roof collapse. It was all rubble that we were essentially moving through. Quite a deep room. Off on one side, sure enough, there's another little tunnel, a small clay tunnel. Popped into that, opens into another room, not a particularly large one, but another room. And on one side of that, there's a trench. So there's a 3-metre deep trench on one side, very soft, very nasty. If you had 2 divers going down there, the second diver's not seeing anything. It's pure silt the whole way through. It led off into this series of very low, very clay-filled sections. Amazing clay blocks. So one of the appeals of Ittlebitty is that they have these gorgeous clay blocks that are formed where during the last ice age, the water level dropped, And so the clay that was on the bottom of the cave dries out and forms these very, square block shapes that have all these different colors inside the side of it from all the different layers of deposition. The clay blocks in the extension were enormous. Instead of being sort of, the size of your face, they were the size of a car bonnet. So,
Wow.
absolutely extraordinary to do that, but very complicated and very dangerous bit of cave. There is a little bit of footage of me going through it available on YouTube, and if I'm not grinding a gouge out of the roof with my head, I'm grinding a gouge out of the floor with my chin. Like it's pretty ugly stuff. So, but we doubled the length of Ittle Bitty. Ittle Bitty had been dived since the 80s. People had known about the 200 metres of main tunnel. I think last time I checked, it's closer to 500 metres of tunnel now. So significantly increased it, and we're still hoping that there's more to explore. There's definitely some very unusual rooms, but in that extension, but coming back towards the main entrance a little bit that we haven't fully explored, and we're sort of very keen to get more time in there. But the logistics of getting to those kind of places is pretty hard. So
Yeah, incredible. And I've asked a few of my guests before this sort of question, and I'm definitely asking for a friend. This is not for me. But as you build yourself up to work through restrictions like that, so I mean, you don't start that on day one of your cave diving, I hope, and you don't start it on day 50 either. It's something that you build up to build experience, comfort level, as Bogart's told me many years ago now. But obviously it's pretty interesting. A lot of people are claustrophobic. I think I've got a little bit of that too. I think I can control it in the main, but it's one thing being a bit claustrophobic, because it's another thing grinding yourself through restrictions where you are effectively stuck for moments or long periods of time as you do that, and then you figure the problem out and figure a way to go forward, or you pull yourself out. So the question is, I guess my first question, how do you build yourself up to that? And how do you know when to push forward and when to pull back?
So I'll start by saying I'm claustrophobic. I'm very claustrophobic. The moment you take the water away. So I've joked with friends regularly, I would never, ever do even a fraction of the things that we do underwater. I wouldn't do them at a dry cave. I look at dry caves and I say, you guys are genuinely mental. Like, no way I would do any of those kind of things. For me, my biggest fear, and I've had to process this to figure these things out, I've had to realize that my biggest fear is actually being trapped head down and my own body weight causing the issue. So the guy who died in Nutty Putty, I think 10, 15 years ago, that's my worst nightmare. The idea that I'd be trapped by my own body weight head down somewhere and potentially having water coming in as well. There's nothing worse than that for me. That said, if I put a regulator in my mouth, I can't write down. So even when we were doing the initial exploration of Engelbrecht's extension, when we were squeezing through some of those dry caves, those dry areas that, are not pleasant, I'd often put a regulator back in my mouth and I'd just breathe from that as reassurance that it's okay. Even if you get your head stuck in water or get trapped a little bit or whatever, you can breathe. It's fine. So that's the biggest fear for me, is not being able to breathe. During the exploration of Ittle Bitty, those side passages that I was talking about, I had a particularly nasty scare. I had a tie off come loose. A lot of the area in there is clay, and I'd actually tied off onto a clay block without realizing it. And the line cut straight through the clay block, just sliced it off and slid straight into a line trap. And so I didn't know that. I didn't know that it happened. It was a complete and utter whiteout behind me. And I'm reeling in, I'm pulling the line in through this whiteout, and suddenly the roof is getting very low. The ceiling is getting very high. And I'm watching with the 5 centimeters of visibility that I've got, I can tell that the line is going into something that I didn't come through. And that's very worrying. I spoke about this last year at Cave Camp in Mexico. one of the things that I very much rely on and I love are the transmitters that I have talking to my shear water,
Yeah.
because I had it set up so that it will tell me at this, you know, how much gas do I have, not necessarily pressure, but at my current breathing rate, how many minutes have I got? And one of the
Mm-hmm.
last things that I could see before I hit total whiteout in that side passage was that I had 56 minutes. So for
Yeah.
me, I was like, okay, yes, I'm on 7 litre cylinders. Yes, this is very squeezy and I'm very scared. But at this depth, I have an hour, and even that calculation is still going to allow 50 bar in both of my cylinders. And I know I'm actually quite close to the entrance. So if I have
Mm-hmm.
the next hour to figure my way out of this. And so breathing faster, getting worried, getting worked up is not going to help. It's going to make things worse. So for me, I turned my lights off. I was in such a squeezy space that the reel that I was using, I essentially tucked up under my chin, and I just laid there, turned my lights off, and waited. And I gave myself 5 minutes. And when I turned the lights back on, it's actually how we discovered that there's flow in Ittle Bitty. There's a tiny little bit of water flow through the cave itself. And I discovered it because there was a laminar flow that the water running along the ceiling had cleared a tiny little bit of flow. So I could actually see a fraction, like we're talking about 2 centimeters off the
Mm-hmm.
roof, that I could see a little bit. I was like, yep, cool. This is a bit more reassuring. The next technique was essentially to turn the light back off, um, put my arms out either side and start feeling, because I'm in a flattener, start
Mm-hmm.
feeling how high the roof and the floor is. And I could tell that my left-hand side was a little bit tighter than the right-hand side. So I was like, okay, well, if there's more space that way, let's go that way. So shuffled over a couple of feet, did the same thing again. Yep, sure enough, there's a little bit more space on that right-hand side still. Shuffled over. I think I did this 3 or 4 times before
Right.
suddenly my right hand was in open space. And I was like, cool, I know that this is where I'm supposed to be. And something clicked in my brain. I suddenly went, I know where I am. I knew where I was in the cave anyway, but I visualized what had happened and realized that the tie off that had come loose was on a 90-degree turn. And I had gone into the angle of the triangle. And so
Mm-hmm.
I needed to go back and follow out along that line. So taking that time to think, um, we've discussed this offline as well, but the diving in Mount Gambier is quite cold. It's about 13 degrees, which if you swing through very slowly through a cave can get cold. Um, I spend most of my time in a wetsuit. People look at me
Mm-hmm.
like I'm mental, but
Yes.
it really comes down to we're very active. We're moving. I'm moving quite a bit. It also gives me a lot uh, of tactile response. So I can
Mm-hmm.
feel something that's caught. So if I have a line wrapped around my leg and I'm wearing a dry suit, I'm probably not going to feel it. If I have a line wrapped around my leg and I'm wearing a wetsuit, I might feel it, depending on how cold I am, but I might feel it. And that kind of tactile response helps a lot when we're pushing into particularly squeezy, nasty places.
And I
So
guess in a wetsuit you're quite slick as well, right? In terms of
much lower
sliding.
profile.
Yeah, and I mean, if you gouge a hole in your wetsuit, so what? You know, or if you put a bit of damage into it,
Yeah,
but it's a different deal in a dry suit putting a hole in it when you're
yeah,
already. Yeah, yeah, I get it, I get it. But yeah, very cool, mate. It's an interesting thing. I mean, obviously on your open water course, you get taught, you know, if you have a problem, stop, breathe,
yeah.
think, and then act. It's driven into us from open water, but obviously as you get more into technical diving, it becomes more and more important. The likelihood of a problem is higher. Your ability to deal with it should be higher, and your equipment should also support you in that. As you mentioned, the amount of gas you're carrying and redundancy and so on. But it's still a mind game. It's still absolutely, how do I deal with this? I've had a couple of, nothing on that scale, but I've had a couple of incidents. I've had an entanglement and a wreck, which kind of similar. I could see, but I was definitely trapped. And took a while to solve that one. And then I had the one in Tank Cave, which I've talked about, and that was an inversion one as well, where inverted upside down, but this one I had gas in my feet while I was stuck, and I didn't feel like I could move forward because I was being pulled in the opposite direction. So that was a problem to solve. And same thing, you take some time, think it through. How can I solve this problem? Make sure you can breathe. Of course, if you can't breathe, it's a different thing. And when I'm teaching, I talk about that. I talk about a hierarchy. The first thing is, can I breathe? Second thing is buoyancy control. Third thing is trim. Fourth thing is whatever action you're going to take. So getting all those things sorted out again is really positive. Doesn't matter in a restriction so much, but breathing does. But the rest of it not so much. But
even breathing. So Lachlan Trott, who you know as well.
Yes.
He said something very interesting to me in probably 2020, and it added a lot of perspective. I'm not encouraging this in any shape or form, but he said, worst case, you lose your air. How long have you got? So you've still got 60 seconds. You've still got maybe 2 minutes or so. If you're in a fight or flight situation, that's a very long time. That's a long time for you to get that problem fixed, if you're aware of it. But it's still, I've had roll-offs. I had a particularly nasty situation where I was in a very small cave that will remain nameless on this podcast, but a very, very small cave with very high flow. And I rolled off one of my cylinders without realizing it. I'd actually rolled off my necklace reg, just going down a flattener. I had a complication because of the flow in my right hand, in my long hose. And I went, well, okay, I say complication. The regulator literally got ripped out of my mouth by the flow. I turned my head a little bit too much and it got ripped out. So I was like, okay, that's fine. Go to the short hose and there's nothing there. And that's very worrying because the long hose is flopping around out in the flow. I've got no control over it. And the reg that I'm trying to breathe from is not breathing.
Yep.
Yeah, that was an interesting experience for everyone involved.
Did you go straight to your valve? What did you do? Did you try and get the
so
loose regulator, or did you?
I actually didn't have enough room to reach my valve,
Right.
so I went straight back to the other reg and threw that reg in my mouth as quickly as I could. But again, it's flopping around out in the flow, so trying to get a handle on it was very scary.
Yeah.
That flustered me enough. I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. It's time to go. Realizing, I suppose, that if you have a scare, it will shut down some of your cognitive abilities. It will limit your ability to deal with other problems.
At least for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
And I was just going to say I was very lucky with that one because I had a very nasty restriction to get out through and got stuck in it. Because I'd been flustered because of those issues, I got stuck on my exit restriction.
After the first one. Yeah.
Yeah.
The breath hold thing is interesting. I was watching a podcast the other day. It was a famous, his name is escaping me, Hawaiian surfer. I think his name's Lane or something. Anyhow, smooth looking dude, blonde hair, if anyone can figure out who that name is. But he was asked in this podcast, how long can you hold your breath? And he said, so far, long enough.
Yeah.
And it was in the parlance of, you're being pounded under the water under a wave and you've got to wait under that wave or you push down until you can come up. And he made the point, it's one thing if you're super relaxed and you want to do an apnea exercise and you train a bit, it's not that hard for most people to get to 4 minutes or so with a bit of training and just super relaxed and chilled out and meditating and so on. But when you're super stressed and working hard, a 20-second breath hold is a pretty good effort. And so it comes back to this point of, how long can you do it? Well, a lot of it depends on the stress levels and your work or your effort that you're putting into what you're doing at the time. It also is, did you manage to take a breath or did you lose your gas after you just breathed out? So now you've got full lungs or partially full lungs versus empty, and all of those things are a factor. I think it is worthwhile doing some apnea training, whether it's free diving or just breath hold for that very reason. And can it help? Yeah, absolutely. One of the exercises I do on my Sidemount courses is it's almost the passing out exercise as I swim up, and I'm often fiddling with people's gear, so they're kind of used to it, but I'll just turn off the valve on the regulator they're breathing. And a lot of people might think, I don't know if people think that's a good idea or not. I'd be interested for you to give me feedback on that. But I do it, and all I want to see them do is switch regulators.
Yep.
It's quite simple. They don't know it's coming, and I come out. I've got my long hose ready, so I'm ready to donate if they need gas. But I just watch them. I'm right in front of them, and I watch them go through this shock of wow, my regulator stopped working, and then they just switch. And I've so far out of quite a few courses have got 100% success of that, and we've been doing it a lot on the course. Of course, they've been switching regulators as they should as they're diving, and they've been switching regulators for valve drills and other skills that we get them to go through. But just that, all I want to know is if you have a problem, will you switch regulators? And I think it's pretty cool, and I think everyone enjoys it. They're a bit pissed off at me at first of, why did you do that? And then they get it. When I explained that, I wanted to know that if you had a problem, you will do the right thing. And then I know, okay, hopefully you're not going to drown yourself straight after the course, and you're going to be safer for the exercise. So it's a pretty important skill, isn't it? Just being able to act when something happens that you weren't expecting.
Just being comfortable is a big factor.
Yeah.
As you said, it's like if you're stressed, if you're on a cave dive and you're still stressed while you're going on a basic cave dive, your ability to respond is limited because you're already stressed. We talked about it a little bit earlier on, but I'd been diving for more than 2 decades before I did my cave course. So when my basic cave instructor started to try and put me through the ringer, I won't discuss him in too many details here, but his attitude to the CDAA stress test was that if the diver wasn't stressed, then they weren't being tested. And me, having done all the diving that I did, coming out of the military doing the stuff that I did, having someone turn my reg off wasn't a big deal.
No big
I was
deal.
like, yeah, cool, turn it back on. He got frustrated with me because I was relaxed. And so, he stepped it up quite a bit. I ended up having both cylinders turned off at different times, things being unclipped, fins being ripped off, like all sorts of fun stuff.
Mask off, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and mask was long gone. Mask was gone 50 meters before. But, I suppose dealing with that, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you follow the rules. You follow those 5 golden rules. And whatever happens, you'll work towards it. You'll work towards the entrance. And maybe I'm a bit blasé about this. Maybe this comes from getting rid of old bombs and things like that. But if you stuff this up, you don't make it. You don't make it. But you getting stressed about it doesn't help anything. So
no.
Take the time, stop, breathe, solve the problem. That's what it boils down to. And if you don't have the time to breathe, getting more stressed about it doesn't improve the situation. So do whatever you can to try and calm down, and then take the steps you need to.
Yeah, words of Jill Hyneth come to me right now as well when I spoke to her about this. And it's so awesome to talk to divers like you and the Jills and the Bogarts of the world, because, you put yourself in these situations. And her thoughts on this were, when you've got a problem, as you rightly say, there's no point stressing about it. What you've got to do is take little steps on the path. I don't know if she said to victory, but it's on the path to solving the problem. And every small step you take will get you closer to that. And so it's really calming your mind and just taking a step, step forward. What can I do now? What can I do next? What can I do next? Until you solve the problem. So, fantastic. I think you said another thing earlier which tweaked with me, which is if you're feeling a bit stressed on a dive, there's nothing wrong with calling it and saying, hey, I'll do this another day, or backing off and just saying, this is not my day to go through that particular place. Or, I definitely do this myself. I'll be doing a dive, and if I'm feeling it, I'm into it. If I'm not, then I'll just back it right off, and we'll do something less stressful. And I think it's a good sane rule to make sure that your diving is safe, is knowing when to pull back, knowing that if you are stressed, if something else happens to layer on top of that, and heaven forbid 2 things layer on top of that, then that's when you start to get yourself into real problems. So, fair enough. Now, you talked about team a couple of times, and I'm going to let you say the name, but you have a team, and Australia is famous for this. We've got the Wet Mules, we've got the Cast Monkeys, and your team is...
We've got the Soggy Wombats as well. So,
where does the name Soggy Wombats come from?
Without getting myself in too much trouble, part part of it links back to the wetsuits. Part of it links back to if you are moving things around vigorously underwater, if you might be sort of shifting things around, for instance, and you're wearing a dry suit, then those dry suits will usually wind up soggy because the seals, as you're moving things around, the seals will move. Squeezing into nasty places, the seals will move, so you'll wind up being soggy coming out of it. We've kind of embraced that. The other element, the wombat element, is that they're nocturnal digging animals. The less we talk about that, the better. Yeah, going out and pretty much going exploring any hole, going and finding whatever we can, even if it is just a wombat hole, which is what a lot of these places have been accused of being. We'll poke our head down and find out as well. So
for our
the
global
team's
audience,
an interesting
Josh,
one.
for our global audience, explain what a wombat is.
Wombat is, I guess, what is a wombat? They weigh about anywhere between about 20 and 35 kilos.
So decent-sized dog size, right?
So I'd about to say, so like a medium-sized dog, but built like a barrel. So they've got quite large claws, and they do use them for digging.
Marsupials?
They're marsupials. They've got a weird pouch. They've actually got a pouch turned backwards. So you'll see photos occasionally of mum wombats carrying their babies, and it's basically the baby's poking out its back end. But it's because when they dig, they don't want to be digging dirt into their pouch.
Fair
so
enough.
yeah,
All by design.
But yeah, I love wombats. One of the Aussie nicknames for the M203 grenade launcher that I used to carry with the army, the 40mm grenade launcher, was the wombat gun. So yeah, I've always been a fan of wombats. I've kind of very much embraced that with the cave diving side of things, because we do go and poke a head down wombat holes. A lot of caves in Australia will have sections called the wombat holes, because that's what the limestone looks like. It looks like wombats have been digging around. So they are very funny critters. They can sprint. They're very fast, and they're well known for having armored butt cheeks as well. So if they're being chased by a predator, they'll run into a burrow and they'll poke their ass out, and the predator won't be able to get through. So
no biting on the butt.
No biting on the butt.
And you spoke last week. I really enjoyed your presentation, and you talked a little bit about team rules, team dynamics, and you've got a bunch of guys in the team. Perhaps you can tell. I know some of them are top secret, so we'll leave them out. But tell us a bit about team rules, team dynamics, and how you pulled that together, and how one becomes a member of the Soggy Wombats.
It's an interesting evolution for the Wombats now. So there's 8 of us in total at the moment. That number has grown a little bit over the last couple of years. It really boils down to a group of folks who aren't interested in, like, we're not there for the fame. There's no fame in any of this. It's not about being special or the best of the best or anything like that. We're just really interested in exploring caves, exploring and being able to share that stuff. One unfortunate element in Australia, I suppose, is that people can often be quite secretive about the discoveries they make. Folks will go through and they'll sort of say, "Oh no, that's my cave. You can't go there," or they won't tell people about different things. We've taken a very different attitude. It's always been about trying to share things as much as possible. We're still a little bit secretive at times because we're trying not to get ourselves in too much trouble. But whenever we can share information, we do it. As soon as we've got an opportunity to share it with the public, we're right there to do those sort of things. So
we won't talk about too much about how you can get into trouble, lest we both get into trouble.
That's right.
But suffice to say that cave diving is very tightly controlled in this part of Australia, and there's rules, and we'll leave it at that. So let's tell us a bit about. I know you mentioned team skills, team dynamics in your presentation. What are you looking for there?
So the team is really a group of friends who've gotten together who do have different areas of specialization. So, I mean, realistically, there's 2 of us that do most of the pushing. It's myself and Martin Slater. We tend to be the ones who squeeze in to places first. Matty Aisbett, I mentioned earlier on, Matt and I did a lot of diving early on, and Matt was my support diver when I squeezed into stupid places. Matt's sort of gone on and become a very highly skilled rebreather diver, very experienced on the Sidewinder, on the Choptima, on all sorts of different things. So very, very skilled in that side of area. Will Passos, who I mentioned before, does the photogrammetry side of things, extraordinary photographer. So the rest of the team will take photos. We'll go and jam a GoPro down somewhere to sort of go, hey, is there a room on the other side of this tiny little crack or whatever? Will's the one who produces the extraordinary photos. He's the one who does all of the scanning. He might hand us the rig and say, you squeeze into that stupid little hole. But then he takes that footage, he processes it, he does all those sort of things. My partner, Chloe, is a very experienced nurse, experienced with emergency medicine, expeditionary medicine. She currently works as an ICU nurse at the Royal Adelaide, here where I'm based. And she's basically our team medic. She also steps in when we're going to do something truly stupid and sort of goes, let's
voice
maybe
of reason.
She is the voice of reason in a lot of cases. She's also the voice of force when needed. If the egos are starting to grow a little bit, Martin and I can definitely butt heads at times. Chloe will often be the one who steps in and goes, you go and do that, you go and do that, and she coordinates things. She doesn't have to do it very often, but she has done it at different times, and it helps a lot. So we've got Simon Backman, who's he's based in Queensland, and he produces extraordinary videos. So while Will does the photos side of things, the photogrammetry, Simon's much more focused on the videos, and he produces extraordinary videos. So he put together the video for when we announced the Engelbrecht's East Extension. He is going to be the one who has put together videos for when we presented Oztech next year. It's all those kind of things. So,
awesome.
And as I said, we've got a couple of folks who are a bit shy, don't necessarily want to put their name out there too widely, just to avoid conflict and issues. But they're very amazing support folks. Very good at connecting people with the right people to go and explore and discover some of these places that we find. So
brilliant. Oh, that's amazing, mate. And as I said, I'm like a huge fan of what you guys do. Just a big quick plug for Martin as well. Martin Slater, based in Victoria. He's produced this amazing map. I don't know whether that was a team effort with you guys as well, but he certainly produced the booklet of the cave. It's basically a cave map that you can carry into the cave. The one time I needed it on the last trip, I left it on the desk, which was a bit annoying. So I inadvertently turned right at H10 rather than left, and took us down the wrong path. And we managed to recover that quite elegantly, but without the book. But it would have been really handy to pull that out of my pocket and realize what the hell I'd done. So it's pretty spectacular, and I want to give that a plug and maybe a link if it's helpful, because certainly anyone in Australia and anyone wanting to dive Tank Cave, which is definitely the jewel of Mount Gambier, then it's a really useful resource for learning the cave, and also if you happen to be in a position where you want to realize where you are on the cave map. So brilliant.
So Martin produced that. He produced it as part of CaveDB, which is Cave Database, which he runs, and it's a global database of caves everywhere. In the case of Tank specifically, that's actually all my data. So I've got a couple of the Nemo survey tools, and I essentially resurveyed Tank to provide the data that he's got for that. Martin helped me out on a few dives. A couple of other folks helped me out, but I then provided that data that Martin has turned into this extraordinary booklet. That's providing up-to-date info. We've got some old maps for Tank. I think the most recent 7th edition that we've got came out a long time ago. I think it's 2017 or 2018. Sure. And there's lots of things that have changed in that cave. So Martin producing what he has is great to have something up to date. And you can dive with it. You literally put it in your pocket and pull it out
Exactly, it's like a set
underwater.
of wet notes, and
Yeah.
I think we actually, having used it, we've got a few improvements that we want to suggest to Martin, just in terms of navigating through the booklet. So they'll come from, I think Dave Pierce has got those suggestions for him. But apart from that, it's fantastic. I still love the cave map. I still love the 2017 in terms of just viewing the whole cave. But when you want to know where the lines go, Martin's book and with your input is certainly the go-to. So congratulations on that. We've done pretty well here, mate. So I just want to close off. A lot of we've been talking a lot about cave diving and extraordinarily advanced levels of cave diving as well. But obviously, a lot of this begins with side mount diving, and I've had a lot of fun teaching side mount to the people who've been coming through and now going through cave levels in Australia on the trips that we've done. Just ran our first courses in Mount Gambier as well for side mount fundamentals and side mount workshop, which were both sold out and just went extremely well. So I was really pleased with that. So let's wind it back to side mount just to close out. Let's just chat real quick about some of the essential skills that you think someone needs to be able to become a decent level side mount diver and then going on to cave diving.
So I would argue side mount, it's probably not a common opinion, but I would say that as soon as you're diving with two gas sources, you're technical diving. So as soon as you've got two cylinders, that's to me, that's technical diving. You're carrying a redundant air source. It's no longer recreational. You might take it to a recreational environment, but I would argue that the skills that you need to be in that technical mindset to be moving into side mount. You need to be managing your gas. You need to be aware that you've got two different sources of air at least. As soon as you move to stage diving, obviously there's a lot more that's going on, but having that helps a lot. That said, I wish I'd been introduced to side mount earlier than I did. I learnt old school back mount, didn't enjoy it. I'm not a big guy. It's part of the reason why I can squeeze into the places that I do. I'm not a big guy. It also means that the length of my back isn't particularly long. So being able to reach back, bashing my head on the back of a manifold, all of that, I hated it. So when I discovered side mount was a thing, I've never looked back. So I think in the 5 or 6 years since I did side mount, besides a bit of diving on my JJ in 2019, I don't think I've had a single cylinder on my back except when I did a trip to Mexico last year and we did a few very, very casual splashes around Cozumel.
Yes.
But yeah, side mount all the way for me. It always has been, just because it's the right tool for the sort of stuff that we do. So in terms of skills, being comfortable with doing shutdown drills, being comfortable with stowing hoses is a really important one. I had a lot of practice with that from back mount diving previously, but obviously stowing hoses on side mount is a different species. It's a different thing. But being comfortable with those kind of things, I don't even think about it these days. I doubt you do either. But when you walk up and you grab a cylinder valve, you don't think, oh, I have to turn this clockwise to turn it off. You just do
100%.
it. You reach it and you do it. So that kind of muscle memory is critical, I suppose. And that purely comes through practice. That comes from familiarity and practice. So I would say the number one thing that people need to be good side mount divers is to dive side mount and do it regularly. The more and more you spend, more time you spend underwater managing your cylinders, getting used to swinging them around, being used to doing all those different things, it just builds confidence and builds those skill sets so that if you do get yourself in some real trouble, you're not then fighting your gear at the same time. It's scary enough wherever you are without then having the challenge of not knowing or being comfortable in the equipment you're using. So,
yeah, spot on. I use that term a lot. That's interesting you raised that. Yeah, I use that term, fighting your equipment. And I kind of feel like I'm always down on back mount divers and back mount rebreather divers. So sorry, guys, but it does look to me like they're fighting their equipment a lot of the time, and it's kind of like, wouldn't you really rather be relaxed and comfortable and balanced and streamlined and all these sort of things? So it's kind of, I think it's the epitome of it, is it? Your equipment isn't fighting you, it's part of you. Yeah. And now you can be, as Bruce Lee said, be one with the water. be the water, my friend.
Absolutely.
And so it's kind of, I think it's such a cool thing, and that kind of zen feeling of being relaxed and being part of it is just comes back to everything that's good about diving is being comfortable in the water and relaxed. And yeah, amazing, mate. Hey, thanks so much for those tips. I hope they were useful to everyone out there. I always learn something. And Josh, amazing to catch up, mate. This was so overdue. I wanted to get you on ages ago and just never got to it. So good to see you a couple of weeks ago. We didn't get to dive because, as I said, I'm not going the places you were going. But next time, you did promise you might come out in AO for us. So if on the next trip, if you're available after Oztech next year, then we'll go diving. But I will see you at Oztech, and I'll come along to your presentation and hear some more about what you're doing. We'll put up some links in the podcast notes. Do you have social media, Josh? And
yeah, I'm not hugely active. What I'd probably encourage is people seek out the Soggy Wombats. Anything interesting that's related to diving. Soggy Wombats have got a Facebook and an Instagram, so yeah, we'll definitely share those.
Yeah, and again, congratulations on the name. You've done well, and congratulations on everything you and the team have achieved. Say hi to Chloe for me. I haven't seen her for a long time, but I hope all is good. And mate, look forward to seeing you next time we catch up. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always, Steve.
You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast and would like to support the show, then why not become a patron of Speaking Sidemount? For as little as $5 per month, you can become a part of the Speaking Sidemount team, get exclusive early access to all of the episodes, and help us to deliver the very best sidemount, cave, and technical dive content available. Just go to www.patreon.com/speakingsidemount for all of the details. The address is also on our Facebook page, listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us for our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.